Dr. Watson. Number two, the New York Times on January 29, 2006, reported that James Hansen, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration senior climate scientist, was warned of dire consequences if he continued to speak out about global climate change and the need for reducing emissions of associated gases. The Times also reported that, quote, at climate laboratories of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for example, many scientists who routinely took calls from reporters 5 years ago can now only do so if the interview is approved by administration officials in Washington, and then only if a public affairs officer is present or on the phone, unquote. 3. In December of 2007, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform issued a report based on 16 months of investigation and 27,000 pages of documentation. According to the summary, quote, the evidence before the committee leads to one inescapable conclusion. The Bush administration has engaged in a systematic effort to manipulate climate change science and mislead policymakers and the public about the dangers of global warming, unquote. The report described how the White House appointed former petroleum industry lobbyist Phil Cooney as head of the Council on Environmental Quality. The report states, quote, there was a systematic White House effort to minimize the significance of climate change by editing climate change reports. Council on Environmental Quality Chief of Staff Phil Cooney and other Council on Environmental Quality officials made at least 294 edits to the administration's strategic plan of the Climate Change Science Program to exaggerate or emphasize scientific uncertainties, or to de-emphasize or diminish the importance of the human role in global warming, unquote. On April 23, 2008, Representative Waxman wrote a letter to EPA Administrator Stephen Johnson. In it, he reported, quote, almost 1,600 EPA scientists completed the Union of Concerned Scientists survey questionnaire. Only 22% of those scientists reported that, quote, selective or incomplete use of data to justify a specific regulatory outcome, unquote, occurred frequently or occasionally at I want to go back over that. He said that over 22% of those scientists reported that selective or incomplete use of data to justify a specific regulatory outcome occurred frequently or occasionally at the Environmental Protection Agency. 94 EPA scientists reported being frequently or occasionally directed to inappropriately exclude or alter technical information from an EPA scientific document. Nearly 200 EPA scientists said that they have frequently or occasionally been in situations in which scientists have actively objected to, resigned from, or removed themselves from a project because of pressure to change scientific findings, unquote. In all these actions and decisions, President George W. Bush has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President George W. Bush, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Article 33. Repeatedly ignored and failed to respond to high-level intelligence warnings of planned terrorist attacks in the United States prior to 9/11. In his conduct while President of the United States, George W. Bush, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates, together with the Vice President, failed in his constitutional duties to take proper steps to protect the nation prior to September 11th, 2001. The White House's top counterterrorism advisor, Richard Clarke, has testified that from the beginning of George W. Bush's presidency until September 11, 2001, Clarke attempted unsuccessfully to persuade President Bush to take steps to protect the nation against terrorism. Clarke sent a memorandum to the then National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, on January 24, 2001, urgently but unsuccessfully requesting a cabinet-level meeting to deal with the impending al-Qaeda attack. In April 2001, Clarke was finally granted a meeting, but only with second-in-command department representatives, including Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, who made light of Clarke's concerns. Clarke confirms that in June, July, and August 2001, the Central Intelligence Agency warned the President in daily briefings of unprecedented indications that a major al-Qaeda attack was going to happen against the United States somewhere in the world in the weeks and months ahead. Yet, Clarke was still unable to convene a cabinet-level meeting to address the issue. Condoleezza Rice has testified that George Tenet met with the President 40 times to warn him that a major al-Qaeda attack was going to take place, and that, in response, the President did not convene any meetings of top officials. At such meetings, the FBI could have shared information on possible terrorists enrolled at flight schools. Among the many preventive steps that could have been taken, the Federal Aviation Administration, airlines, and airports might have been put on full alert. According to Condoleezza Rice, the first and only cabinet-level meeting of 9/11 that is the first and only cabinet-level meeting prior to 9/11 to discuss the threat of terrorist attacks took place on September 4th, 2001, 1 week before the attacks on New York and Washington. On August 6, 2001, President Bush was presented a President's Daily Brief article titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." The lead sentence of that President's Daily Brief indicated that bin Laden and his followers wanted to follow the example of World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef and bring the fighting to America. The article warned al-Qaeda members, including some who are U.S. citizens, have resided in or traveled to the U.S. for years, and the group apparently maintains a support structure that could aid attacks. The article cited a more sensational threat, reporting that bin Laden wanted to hijack a U.S. aircraft, but indicated that the CIA had not been able to corroborate such reporting. The President's Daily Brief item included information from the FBI indicating patterns of suspicious activity in this country, consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings in New York. The article also noted that the CIA and FBI were investigating a call to our embassy in the United Arab Emirates in May, saying that a group of bin Laden supporters was in the U.S. planning attacks with explosives. The President spent the rest of August 6 and almost all the rest of August 2001 on vacation. There's no evidence that he called any meetings of his advisors to discuss this alarming report. When the title and substance of this Presidential Daily Briefing article were later reported in the press, then National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice began a sustained campaign to play down its significance until the actual text was eventually released by the White House. New York Times writer Douglas Gell put it this way, quote, "In a single 17-sentence document, the intelligence briefing delivered to President Bush in August 2001 spells out the who, hints at the what, and points towards the where of the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington that followed 38 days later, unquote.